right, so today I'm going to talk about eelgrass as an early indicator of changing conditions in Humboldt Bay, Wiggy, and the Eel River, Wheat Estuary. So first I want to just give a brief outline. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we know about eelgrass in Humboldt Bay and the Eel River. And then I'm going to talk very briefly about sea level rise and weather whiplash over the last 10 years. I'm going to talk about some pilot studies and monitoring that have been going on in the Bay for quite some time now that provide insights into some of these changing conditions. And then I want to follow up at the end with a little statewide snapshot of eelgrass distribution and Bay-wide monitoring history. So why do we monitor eelgrass? Well, seagrass ecosystems have been globally recognized indicators of health, function, and stability of estuarine environments for quite some time. Eelgrass itself can be seen not disparagingly, but as sort of a biosond, if you will. It's an easily and repeatably monitored, widely distributed integrator of environmental conditions. Eelgrass is relatively insensitive to short-term stressors, but it does respond to chronic, natural, and anthropogenic conditions. And it also provides a few ancillary environmental benefits. So what do we know about eelgrass distribution in Humboldt Bay and the Eel River Estuary? Well, most of what we know from sort of a broad scale standpoint comes from the 2009 benthic habitat project. And this was a collaborative effort with many partners, but fundamentally between NOAA and California Sea Grant. And so it wasn't the first effort to map and understand the distribution or abundance of eelgrass in Humboldt Bay, but it was really the first comprehensive survey that capitalized on really good low tide conditions that occurred with good high resolution sensors and that happened near the peak of the growing season. So really it took a number of years for this project to actually unfold and come to fruition. Really kind of the right combination of really crystal clear skies, which we don't see a lot in late June around here. But at any rate, the end result of this project was probably the first time we really got a good understanding of the distribution of eelgrass in both of these systems. And there's about 5,000 acres of eelgrass in Humboldt Bay. It's actually kind of a difficult thing to really get down to brass tacks on because we've got different configurations of eelgrass habitat based on where you are in the bay and where you are even within the elevation gradient in which eelgrass occurs within the bay. And in the Eel River, there's about 40 acres of eelgrass, or there has been historically. But a lot of things have happened since 2009. I just realized that was 15 years ago as I was putting this talk together. In this image here, you can see some biologists who are observing an area of really active erosion and eelgrass loss. And this is just a couple hundred yards away from a long-term monitoring transect that actually, I think Frank Shaughnessy was the first person to establish a monitoring site in this location. And so this is one of the early indicators we saw, I think in 2018 is when we first started noticing some really dramatic changes occurring in this particular meadow in South Bay. So this is an area of active headcut erosion and channelization occurring in an area that was previously unchanneled. There's basically no channel morphology prior to the expansion of some of these channels. So since 2009, I think we've really seen a lot of fairly unprecedented events in most of our lifetimes, and kind of started with a multi-year extreme drought between 2013 and 2015. And superimposed over that drought were two of the warmest years on record at the state level in California, as well as a previously unprecedented marine heat wave between 2014 and 2015. And we see indications from the instrument record here that actually occurred into 2016 as well. We had a couple of wet years, 2016 and 2017, pretty dramatically wet years. And then we actually had two almost normal years back to back. Which seems almost amazing in the context of the general period here. In 2020 through 2022, a multi-year drought returned. And in between 2021 and 2023, we saw what's been fairly commonly referred to as a triple dip La Nina. So three consecutive years of La Nina conditions. And then finally, over the last winter, as we all know, we had a relatively strong El Nino event. And so not to neglect sea level rise, but I also don't want to steal anyone else's thunder because there'll be people that know a lot more about this talking after me. But For those of you that don't know, Humboldt Bay experiences the most rapid rate of relative sea level rise on the west coast of the United States. But even within Humboldt Bay, the rate of sea level rise varies with location. It's really in the southern half of the bay where our relative sea level rise rates are off the charts, and this is a result of vertical land motion. I'll leave it at that because there will be other people talking more about this later on in the symposium. Okay, so let's get into some data. We already heard a little bit about Senkus and a water quality station in Humboldt Bay. And in 2013, the Senkus station was established in its current location now, fairly centrally located within the bay. So this is essentially 11 years of water quality monitoring data, and I've only chosen to select temperature for today's talk. So this is just looking at monthly average water temperature that you see with the black line. The dashed line is the long-term average monthly water temperature, and then the pink and the blue shading is essentially kind of cleaning outliers from the data. So that's from the mean to the 10th percentile of monthly water temperatures and to the 90th percentile. So this kind of gives you an idea of the variability that we see. And I'll be honest, I look at this and I see, okay, I see, a fairly consistent pattern one year to the next. It just doesn't jump off the screen as being that dramatic. But if we add some lines to the chart, so we can kind of constrain some of this a little bit, what we see is that in 2014, 2015, and continuing into 2016, we had really unprecedented extended period of warm, above average water temperatures in the bay. And so you can see from the multi-year drought, as I mentioned on the last slide, we transition into a marine heat wave. And then we have consecutive wet years as the marine heat wave subsides. We have those two approximately normal years. And then the multi-year drought returns. But the second time we see this multi-year drought in the last decade, we don't have the same extreme temperatures. So it's a little bit different. And then a bit of overlap between these different features. We have the multi-year La Nina again, and then El Nino most recently. And when we start thinking about what we've known and what we've learned from various efforts that a number of you in this room have participated in, that thermal stress and wasting disease really went off the charts. And it started before the marine heat wave. And I think the extreme drought probably meant that we ended up with a lot of additional solar insolation. And because we have fairly limited instrumentation in the bay, I think we actually have places in the bay and on the flats that were probably cooking even before the marine heat wave arrived. So Frank and others, including Vicky Fry, were some of the first people to observe, hey, something's going on. The upper edge of the eelgrass meadows are starting to retreat downslope. Vicky noticed a really extreme outbreak of wasting disease and took some good pictures of that at the time. We were seeing a lot of leaf shed and just evidence of stress in the eelgrass beds in the heart of the summertime. Moving forward in around 2016, 2017, we start seeing signs in the Eel River estuaries sloughs of eelgrass loss. And so the Salt River Restoration Project actually was one of the first sources of information to document some of the changes that were occurring down there. And I actually think down there, 2 consecutive wet years in an estuary like the Eel, which has a really large watershed area and gets a tremendous amount of freshwater runoff, especially during wet years, that some of those early losses of eelgrass in that system were likely driven by really low salinity. So moving forward, we start to see some things changing in Humboldt Bay proper around 2018, and we start to move into that, as I mentioned before, more of a near normal temperature and rainfall pattern. We start to observe eelgrass seedling recruitment and vegetative expansion in Humboldt Bay. Unfortunately, in that same timeline, we still continue to see eelgrass declining in the sloughs. And so Frank, again, was one of the first people to raise the alarm that at one of the long-term monitoring sites in Mad River Slough was essentially losing all of its eelgrass right near the bridge there. A little bit of good news, in the last few years during this triple dip La Nina, we've actually seen eelgrass recovery continuing. The rates of expansion of some of our beds where we're doing monitoring have slowed, but we definitely see some pretty encouraging signs of recovery. So when I talk about the monitoring that's happened around here, a number of entities have been involved in that. And so at Merkel and Associates, we have used UAVs to do a lot of aerial work in association with locations where other people are doing on-the-ground monitoring. And so the red boxes that you see on the map here are actually indicative of sites that Frank talked about, this cooperative eelgrass monitoring program. So most of these red boxes align with on-the-ground multi-year transects that have been monitored up until 2021. And then the areas that you see outlined in yellow are areas that we've flown UAVs and done a lot of aerial monitoring with some funding support from NOAA and Sea Grant during the last few years. You can also see again, the distribution of eelgrass from the 2009 survey to give you an idea of how much we have in our bay here. So unfortunately, what we're finding in the sloughs in the last few years here, despite recovery occurring in the bay proper, we've had a pretty substantial decline in the linear extent of eelgrass in Mad River Slough, particularly in Humboldt Bay, to a lesser degree in Eureka Slough, and not as much in Elk River, which is kind of interesting. And so when we see eelgrass declines are most pronounced in the upper reaches of Humboldt Bay sloughs, and changes in eelgrass linear extent tend to be consistent with the slough distance from the bay's entrance. In Eel River, what we see is, unfortunately, generally a pretty dramatic decline in eelgrass extent. And so, again, lost almost all of the eelgrass in the southern half of the Eel River estuary and in the upper reaches of the sloughs in the northern portion of the estuary. So these changes track with slough channel width and depth, as well as the distance from the mouth of the estuary. The one interesting note in McNulty Slough is that the expansion of eelgrass occurring there appears to be related to the fact that the mouth of the river is actually shifting to the south. And so that slough channel is effectively elongating. So to hand wave our way through what we've learned from all these various pilot studies and monitoring efforts, we saw substantial loss of eelgrass in North Bay between 2013 and 2016, followed by a pretty dramatic recovery with eelgrass now approaching that 2009 extent within that compartment of the bay. The changes have been pretty minimal near the bay entrance and in Elk River, and we've actually seen signs of eelgrass expansion relative to 2009 in the northern portion of South Bay. We see moderate eelgrass declines observed within the southern portion of South Bay and within Eureka Slough, and substantial declines in Mad River Slough and the Eel River sloughs, with the greatest losses occurring where the slough channel volume and tidal exchange are more limited. So it's not just eelgrass in Humboldt Bay that's responding to these changing conditions. It's a really dramatic shoreline retreat and expansion of channels occurring around the bay. This is just one example from Elk River, from the spit near the entrance of the bay. This is kind of an anomalous, interesting freshwater wetland feature that's existed since at least 1954 based on the Humboldt Bay Historical Atlas. At any rate, that was wax myrtle and willow trees bracketing that pond area. And what you can see is that the rate of shoreline retreat in the last 5 years at this site has actually accelerated from close to 50 feet a year to about 100 feet a year. And now on king tides, the bay is regularly now overtopping the Elk River spit right into the lower portion of the Elk River. So I would say definitely expect the mouth of that river to potentially migrate before too much longer here. So what can we take home from this? Well, with limited instrumentation to monitor physical changes, eelgrass can really tell us a lot about what's going on in the bay, and understanding the dynamics of the system is really critical for effective management. Bay-wide monitoring really provides the foundation for understanding how conditions are changing over time, and it's really important for prioritizing and targeting conservation, restoration, and mitigation, where efforts are going to be most likely to be resilient. So to provide a little bit more context, we've got about twice as much eelgrass in Humboldt Bay as in the next largest system in California. That'd be San Francisco Bay, which is actually 67 times the size of Humboldt Bay. So we really are a special place for eelgrass. And this slide is just trying to show what we know about eelgrass in Humboldt Bay relative to the other bays in the state. So these are the 6 largest bays in California. The green bars are showing the proportional extent of eelgrass relative to the state total. The pink and red bars are showing climate perturbations such as El Niños, which tend to be pretty harsh on eelgrass and other systems. And then in 2015, the marine heat wave. And it's not an abacus, but the green dots are actually representing the number of comprehensive eelgrass surveys that have occurred in each of these systems. And what you'll notice is that there's almost a perfectly inverse relationship between the amount of eelgrass we have and the amount of effort that's been put into monitoring. And so just trying to make a pitch that that one comprehensive survey occurred during a pretty benign climatic period for us. And so in this same time period, we've seen in 2017, Morro Bay had 13 acres of eelgrass, almost all of it near the mouth of the bay, almost all of it subtidal. Last year, we did a comprehensive survey in Morro Bay. We found 750 acres of eelgrass in Morro Bay, more than has ever been seen there before. So I just want to close by saying, thanks to everyone, and our bays can be really dynamic, but our eelgrass beds can be really resilient, especially if we can give them a helping hand, and eelgrass is a really good indicator of changing conditions. So thanks.